and I told you so. I'm a kid in the candy store, put the leather on the denim. I ain't the cure, I'm the venom. If you wanna find me, find the taillights. Something's coming in, you're gonna wanna take a red eye. It's time to go. It's time to go. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Don't blink, don't blink. Get ready.
Saturday again, and 3 o'clock ang Maestro time here at the Katipunan channel. And as I was preparing for my topic for today, I browsed through some books in the late Butch Valdez library, and one of them was Inside the Palace by Birthday Romulo, Inside the Palace, and the other book is Face of Empire by Frank Hinman Golay. The first book is about it's here by Birthday Romulo, Inside the Palace. But it's really a glimpse of the rise and fall of Ferdinand Marcos, of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. And The Face of Empire by Frank Hinman Golay is also about the United States-Philippine relations, 1898 to 1946. But a better book for really Philippine-American relationship is In Our Image, and that is by Stanley Carnell. And Stanley Carnell was still alive in 1986 when I was assigned to Washington, D.C. as a Philippine diplomat. And I think I arranged as press attaché, I was able to arrange 2 or 3 meetings between him and my superior, Ambassador Emmanuel Pelaez, from 1986 to 1992, when we had the chance to serve in the embassy in Washington, D.C. And also, 2 years of which we also were concurrent with the UN permanent seat of the Philippines in the United Nations in New York. On that job, I often started my speeches before white Anglo-Saxon audiences, conscious of the title of our episode today, which is episode 206, Imperial Manila, a cheek of the same Janus, U.S. imperialism. And I would tell my audiences a brief introduction that I, of course, come from the Philippine Islands, whose history meant almost 400 years confined in a convent life around Spanish friars, 40 years indoctrination to Hollywood under the Americans, and 4 years of accidental sashimi under the Japanese. Of course, that would that would court a little laughter from the crowd. But the U.S. State Department summarizes our ignominious handshake by saying, after its defeat in the Spanish-American War, Spain ceded its long-standing colony of the Philippines to the United States in the Treaty of Paris. On February 4, 1899, just a few days before the U.S. Senate ratified the treaty, fighting broke out between American forces and Filipino nationalists led by Emilio Aguinaldo, who sought independence rather than a change in colonial rulers. The ensuing Philippine-American War lasted 3 years and resulted in the death of over 4,200 Americans and over 20,000 Filipino combatants. Where the disagreement in casualties came about was in how many Filipino civilians died from violence, famine, and disease. The U.S. estimates 200,000, but the 1901 statement of General Franklin Bell that Americans have killed at least 600,000 Filipinos, to which a participant in the 1981 New York Review of Books corroborated that figure to as much as 700,000 if one uses the population estimate in 1898 provided in the census of 1903. The population then was 6.5 million, and so the subsequent death toll would amount to 10%, which could very well qualify for genocidal proportions. The most heavily affected was southern Philippines, notably Balanginga in summer, in terms of numbers, but in terms of rapacity, in terms of severity, Budaho and Budbaksak in Holo would be more prominent. The genocidal manifestation of American imperialism is more than, however, slaying the body, but captivating the human mind. And when the Americans granted the Philippines its independence on July 4, 1946, they made sure that the umbilical cord was very much still positioned. By the way, we showed here a picture. Could we go back to the slide? We showed here a picture of the March 7, 1906 Battle of Budaho. And if you would look at this from with a magnifying glass, you will see bodies of women and children together with men that were massacred by the American forces. All right. In economics, we had the Bell Trade Act, which allowed American investors to exploit natural resources excuse me, and operate public utilities. On the other hand, the Laurel-Langley Agreement permitted them to invest in all economic activities. In both agreements, the Filipino citizens could not enjoy parity rights. What is parity rights? That would mean even Steven standing Filipinos and Americans. The Americans would always be at the advantage. For the military, we had the Military Bases Agreement of 99 years. This, of course, will be reduced by Ferdinand Marcos Sr. to half to 50 years. The Military Assistance Pact and the Mutual Defense Treaty To this day, most of the senior officers of the Armed Forces of the Philippines have received training in the United States. The honing of our military is interwoven in the American combat doctrines, which explains for why our military exercises are still oriented against foreign invasion using our beachheads. The return and proliferation of U.S. bases in the country, euphemistically under the cover of Philippine bases, with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, is actually the U.S. Air Force new doctrine of agile combat employment, ACE, designed to ridiculously position the U.S. in a counterpoise against China. Propaganda, however, justified this to a compliant media, initially as increased preparedness for humanitarian assistance and disaster response, HADR, and when its absurdity was proven by lack of U.S. presence in numerous typhoons and natural disasters from 2014, when EDCA started to depress it, the Defense Department relabeled it as deterrence and handled for the modernization of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. But the greatest leverage of the Americans on the Philippines is the adulteration of our culture onto linear Western mind, principally through the migration of Filipinos to the United States. The 1910 U.S. Census recorded only 406 people of Filipino descent in the mainland U.S., including 109 in Louisiana, 17 in Washington State. The migration wave began during the period when the Philippines were a territory of the United States, as U.S. nationals, Filipinos, were unrestricted from migrating to the U.S. by the Immigration Act of 1917. Filipinos of this wave came for different reasons, but the majority were laborers, predominantly Ilocano and Visayas. The wave of immigration was distinct from other Asian Americans due to American influence and education in the Philippines. Therefore, they did not see themselves as aliens when they immigrated to the United States. And this cartoon would show us in the slide that Uncle Sam was offering on one hand a soldier, in other words, the stick, and on the other hand, a school teacher, a carrot, to a group of reluctant Filipinos, telling them that the choice is theirs. So, let's go on. By 1920, the Filipino population in the mainland U.S. rose from nearly 400 to over 5,600 by 1930. The Filipino-American population exceeded 45,000, including over 30,000 in California by 1930 and 3,400 in the East Coast. Today, the American Community Survey of 2019 estimated the population of Filipinos in the United States to be about 4.2 million, or about 1.3% of total population, where they tend to have significantly higher income than the overall foreign and native-born population. About 42 of these reside in the state of California. By 2022, they accounted for 38 billion, that's just 1 year, in annual remittance flows to the Philippines. So if you wish to see how Filipino Americans are performing in the U.S., here's the link: migrationpolicy.org, article on Filipino immigrants, United States. Or you can comment on this program, give your email address, and we will send you the link. In terms of foreign investments between 2016 and 2022, however, the U.S. comes as a poor third at $1.3 billion to Japan's $2.8 billion, and China and Hong Kong's $1.7 billion. South Korea is fourth at $1.1 billion, and Taiwan is fifth at a low of 580,000. But if you add Taiwan to Hong Kong and China, you would know that Japan and China, Hong Kong and Taiwan, would be neck to neck with Japan, showing a very poor third for the United States. You know, Imperial Manila is a pejorative description used by sectors of Filipino society and non-Manileños, those residing or near Manila, to express the idea that all the affairs of the Philippines, whether in politics, economy, and business or culture, are decided by what goes on in the national capital region, Metro Manila, without considering the needs of the rest of the country, largely because of a highly centralized government. National artist Nick Joaquin expressed, "When Manila sneezes, the rest of the Philippines catches cold." The proverb also said, "Not a leaf can fall in our country without Malacanang's permission." In an article published in the Philippines Daily Inquirer, Amando Doronila, the late Amando Doronila, the great dean of Philippine journalism, reflected the strong opinions of political writers, particularly those living outside Metro Manila, who associate this term with the People Power Revolution because it was believed that the country's former President Ferdinand Marcos was toppled from his position without the participation of Filipinos living in areas outside of the capital region. Doronila said, "People power movements have been an Imperial Manila phenomenon. Their playing field is EDSA. They have excluded the provincianos from their movement with their insufferable arrogance and snobbery, ignoring the existence of the toiling masses and peasants in agrarian Philippines. It is ingrained in the minds, especially of those in southern Philippines, that Imperial Manila and its primacy and persistence over time has led to the prolonged underdevelopment in Philippine provinces. Worse, it has developed among government officials into attitudes that manifest itself in subservience that can be interpreted as canine devotion to the powers that be." In the discussion of Imperial Manila, my first reference is from Ambassador Rigoberto Tiglau's column at the Manila Times, who recently exposed this condition reflex of two cabinet members. The first he quotes National Security Advisor Eduardo Año's bannered screaming statement by several media outlets, any secession move to be met with resolute force. Not to be outdone, Defense Secretary Gilbert Teodoro said, "The military will use force to quell and stop any and all attempts to dismember the Republic." Tiglao said, "It is these two officials blabbering that should be quelled." And in fact, Interior and Local Government Secretary Benhar Abalos clarified that the President, Mr. Marcos, definitely did not give any order for any government official to oppose former President Duterte's move for an independent Mindanao. Those who issued statements did so out of concern for what's happening. Well, this is part of the conundrum in this administration when there are too many voices, not even coming from the wilderness, but from the centrality of the cabinet and sub-cabinet. Some government spokesmen are not even trained to research first for the facts, but they are already engaged in reading talking points. Tiglao said they were brainlessly reacting to former President Rodrigo Duterte's statement at a sparsely attended, detailed reported press conference in Davao City last week about regrouping Mindanao leaders led by former House Speaker and current Davao del Norte 1st District Representative Pantaleon Alvarez to push for what has been called the Mindanao Initiative. I was at Davao in both the MySug Leaders Forum and the People's Prayer Rally, and I did not hear any secessionist statements. What Duterte invoked was that if the President continues on his addiction to prohibited drugs, remains hostage to American demands, prioritize on polarizing politics in their quest to perpetuate their family in power, tolerate corruption at high levels, and continuously neglect the needs of the many who are poor, especially the people of Mindanao, then it would make sense for Mindanao to just separate from the Philippines. This was expressed in the conditional mood where Marcos People's Initiative, together with House Speaker Romualdez, will be met by a Mindanao Initiative. Rod Katipunan presents a different perspective. He says the issues that have driven the indefinitely graver call for the exploration of the Mindanao independence is the direct physical threat with the insidious flirtation of Marcos Jr. administration as regards the arrest of former President Rodrigo Duterte by the U.S.-controlled International Criminal Court and the subsequent inclusion of the Vice President, Sara Duterte, in the charge of human rights violations in connection with the anti-drug war. He was referring to Bongbong Marcos's volte-face. After really too much dilly-dallying, he said, Marcos declared the ICC had no jurisdiction in the Philippines as the country had withdrawn from the ICC's Rome Statute in March 2018. But he expressed a politically insensitive, quote, "They are welcome, however, to ICC visitors threatening the most popular Philippine ex-president in living memory." Katipunan added that really seated among the Dutertes and the huge following all over the country of the much-missed tough anti-drug president. Katipunan also said that the attacks on Duterte are part of a U.S. strategic political plan to continue its control of the Philippines through the traditional political elite it has co-opted and to target the independent-minded Dutertes, whom the U.S. is determined to eliminate from future politics in the country. The broader implication of the recolonization of the Philippines is the systematic dismantling of any national economic plan, and one of the earliest victims to this is the extremely vital 10-phase, 1,544-kilometer Mindanao Circumferential Railway to be funded by a multi-billion-dollar official development assistance from China. During Duterte's term, you would note China also funded the Samal Davao Bridge and the Bukana Bridge project, which recently commenced construction. So the Mindanao independence movement sentiment is not just about the Duterte. Katipunan explained, it is about the entire development strategy of the nation, which the U.S. continues to block as they try their darndest during the time of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and succeeded in sabotaging his 11 industrial projects just before they finally ousted him with a controlled puppet Corazon Aquino. The rest is a 30-year history of dismantling of the Philippines' independent economy and its mantra of liberation, deregulation, and privatization. For 6 years under Duterte, the Philippines saw a revival of Marcos Sr.'s independence in foreign policy and the revival of the national and fiscal economy development of public and industrial infrastructure development and building spree. But U.S. imperialism has been restored. Manila's diktats now, according to Katipunan, follow the strategy of oppression, suppression, deconstruction of development initiatives and projects. We go to another pundit, but before that, okay, we go to Ricardo Saludo. As we take its side, the U.S. is losing global clout. Now, after 2 years of war and devastation for Ukraine and the economic fallout for the world, 500,000 dead, Kiev's army nearing collapse, and tens of millions of Ukrainians displaced and mostly driven abroad, Russia is stronger militarily and economically. Its 750,000 troops in and around Ukraine are the most powerful in Europe, and its economy has overtaken Germany to become the number 5 in the world based on World Bank circulation, boosted by petroleum revenues and defense spending. Saludo is convinced that if Washington is seen as compromising the interests of its allies, they would have less reason to follow its leadership. And if that happens in Europe, it's paramount bailiwick, it's even more so elsewhere. So we go to his second point. Saludo is convinced with this second new development eroding U.S. clout, Israel's looming attack on Rafah, a tiny enclave in the southern Gaza bordering Egypt, and the last population center in the territory not held by Israeli forces, where 1.3 million Palestinians, mostly fleeing war, have holed up. Already incensed over Washington's military aid for Israel and opposition to overwhelmingly approved United Nations resolutions for Gaza ceasefires, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates have warned against attacking Rafah. But Netanyahu is determined to proceed. He has ordered the army to evacuate 1 million people from the potential war zones, but that won't stop the mounting body count, now topping 28,000, mostly women, children, according to the Gaza Health Authority's report. Let us play this very important video. And from the viewpoint, let's change our strategy here. From commentary, let us be a listener and listen closely. Here is the video cut.
There's no protection in a tent. It was, said one man, the most terrifying night of his life. They managed to get some of the injured to the Kuwait hospital in Rafah. Shock and trauma, fear, pain and grief are all mixed up. It's been going on for so long now, and Rafah was meant to be safe. Safe? What does the word even mean in Gaza today?
We were at home when the airstrikes were happening. I told my mother I wanted to use the bathroom. Suddenly, all the walls of the bathroom and the water containers above collapsed all around me.
Maya al-Najjar survived. She knows that her father didn't make it, but hasn't yet been told that the rest of her family were also killed.
We were in the tent, me and all my family, when the bullets came at us. My father went to see what was happening and said there were airstrikes. Then a strike happened when he was talking and everyone ran.
The airstrikes provided cover for an Israeli Special Forces operation to rescue 2 hostages held in a house in Rafah. It was destroyed afterwards, and neighbours showed the casings of rounds they'd picked up, used in the shootout between the Israelis and those holding the captives. In Tel Aviv this morning, 70-year-old Louis Haar was reunited with his family, as was his fellow hostage, 6-year-old Fernando Marman. Both thinner apparently, but otherwise healthy. Hamas claimed today that a further 3 hostages have been killed in recent Israeli strikes. At least 67 Palestinians, many of them children, were killed in the operation to rescue the hostages, only adding to the concern of Western leaders who want Israel to cease fire, but still refuse to use the leverage of suspending arms supplies.
Well, we are very concerned about what is happening in Rafah, because let's be clear, the people there, many of them have moved 4, 5, 6 times before getting there. And it really, we think, is impossible to see how you can fight a war amongst these people. There's nowhere for them to go.
President Biden is reported to have lost patience with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, but there's still no sign of the Americans exerting any real pressure. The EU, in turn, is losing patience with the Americans.
How many times have you heard the most prominent leaders and foreign ministers around the world saying too many people are being killed? President Biden said this is too much on the top. It's not proportional. Well, if you believe that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide less arms in order to prevent so many people being killed.
In Rafah now, if you're 5 years old, your version of normal is that instead of playing, you pick stuff out of the rubble of a mosque that was destroyed the night before. The Israeli government says it's determined to mount a ground operation in Rafah to destroy Hamas. How many more Palestinian children's lives will be destroyed in the process?
Well, a short while ago, I spoke to the Israeli government spokesperson Elon Levy, and I began by asking for his response to Foreign Secretary David Cameron's comments that Israel should stop and think before taking further action in Rafah.
After the October 7 massacre, we are proceeding with the destruction of Hamas's military machine, and that we urge civilians to get out of the way because we don't want them to be hurt.
Where should
Hamas
they
has
go?
two strategies. Well, there are areas north of Rafah where we have already cleared the areas of Hamas, and we want to see civilians going to areas where Hamas is not operating.
So
That
are
is
you
why we
now
are giving
saying that everywhere
warning.
north of Rafah is now safe and that there will not be Israeli bombardment if people move into those areas?
Unfortunately, until Gaza is no longer governed by an internationally prescribed terrorist organization that is deliberately trying to hide behind civilians, Gaza will not be safe.
So there is
We are
nowhere
trying
for people to
make
go.
the region
I mean, that's
safe.
what David Cameron said today. There is literally nowhere for them to go. And he is right in saying that, isn't he?
No, we designated, for example, the Al-Mawasi area, just to give one example, as an area in the Gaza Strip where Hamas has not already embedded itself with that vast tunnel network inside the Gaza Strip to hide behind civilians.
You say they should get out of the way, but you have also admitted in this interview there is nowhere safe for them to go because there is nowhere where you can say there will not be airstrikes. So,
And the international community must insist that civilians can be vacated away from areas
Where?
where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields.
Are you
to
saying they
areas
should go
where
to
we have
Egypt?
already destroyed. No. To
then what
areas
do you
in the
mean by
Gaza
the
Strip where
international
we
community should help you with this?
look. Since Israel could have gone in all guns a-blazing on October 8th, we didn't because we knew the results would be catastrophic. We gave 3 weeks warnings for civilians to be able to evacuate northern Gaza and secured humanitarian corridors for them to get out because we wanted a fair fight against Hamas without civilians in the way. We think it's horrific that UN agencies have tried to characterize Israel's actions in pursuance of its obligations under international law to protect civilians as forced displacement. Because what do these UN agencies tell Israel? You cannot attack Hamas military targets because there are civilians in the way and they might get killed, but you can't ask civilians to get out of the way because then they'll be displaced. The logical conclusion is that they are telling Israel not to attack Hamas at all.
I mean, it does appear today that you are losing international support. I mean, the British government is now taking quite a strong position. The EU Foreign Policy High Representative Joseph Borrell has said that the Americans should stop sending you weapons. There has been a Dutch court ruling stopping the sending of F-35 parts because of the risk of war crimes. And according to a report from NBC, the US President Joe Biden is now referring to your leader, Mr. Netanyahu, as an asshole.
Netanyahu, an asshole. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have a slide here that shows U.S. interventions since World War II, to which Jimmy Carter, one of its former presidents, reacted. We're supposed to be a Christian nation, are we not? But we are known throughout the world as the most warlike country on earth, and I would say almost all the wars in which we have been involved have been unnecessary. Here is a list on the left side. From China in 1945 to 1946, to Syria in 1949, to Korea, to China again, all the way down to Indonesia in 1965, to Peru, Argentina in 1976, to the Philippines in 1989, to Iraq in 1992 to 96, Iraq again in 1998, all the way to Yugoslavia, to Iraq again in 2002 and 2003, to Somalia, Iran, Brazil, Bolivia, Venezuela, again Iraq in 2020, Afghanistan in 2020, and now here in Gaza and Ukraine. We are witnessing a country that has invested 7 to 8 trillion US dollars, trillion, in more than 24 wars. So this is the kind of a country that we're partnering with. And I am particularly disheartened with what's happening in Gaza. As this slide would show, Israel is the real bully, and the United States is supporting it. 28,176 killed. In Ukraine, more than 500,000 combatants, not including civilians. With 20 million, half of its population ending as refugees. But what about Gaza? They cannot go anywhere. And after this 28 million, 12 out of this 28,000 killed, 12,000 are children. And when a vote was taken for a truce in the United Nations, guess whose hand in the permanent member in the Security Council races? And that is the hand of the United States. In the case of Gaza, Saludo stressed that when the United UN General Assembly voted twice since October for humanitarian ceasefires, the U.S. joined Israel in the small and dwindling minority of the nations voting no. The Internal Court of Justice has issued an initial ruling on South Africa's suit alleging genocide by Israel in Gaza, calling for action to prevent genocide. Let's see what happens further. Washington, however, will probably never accept a genocide ruling to avoid having to take action against Israel, as U.S. law requires for genocidal acts. How the U.S. will be consistent in its own laws will be a test here. The third aspect where the U.S. is losing clout is in the aspect of de-dollarization. American support for Israel is alienating most nations of Asia and Africa, including Indonesia, Malaysia, and Brunei in the ASEAN. So while the Philippines is becoming a U.S. military platform in Asia, the rest of ASEAN has not followed Washington's lead in building a regional alliance to counter China. Saludo, former cabinet member during Arroyo's presidency, noted that the third development is that of BRICS, where the global economic grouping led by its acronym nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, now being joined by other countries whose top initiative is the expansion of trade and financial flows, bypassing the dominant dollar-based international monetary system. Let us play the video.
Globally is getting worse over time, not better. Oxfam, the international humanitarian organization, published a report that found that the richest 1% of the world took 2/3 of global wealth since 2020, twice as much as earned by 99% of the population. And if you look at the economic gap between poor countries, emerging and developing countries concentrated in the global south, and the rich colonial countries in the global north, if you remove China from the data, that you can see that in the past 20 years, there basically has been no change in the economic gap between rich and poor countries. When you add China to that gap, you can see that it looks like inequality globally is getting better over time. But that's because China has a different economic model. And that brings us to the kind of new Cold War and the aggressive trade war and tech war policies that the US has been waging against China. First, I want to talk about the expansion of the BRICS bloc, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In a summit in South Africa in August, the BRICS officially invited 6 new countries to join what will now be the extended BRICS Plus bloc. Those included Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Argentina. However, in Argentina, a far-right president came to power, Javier Milei, and he announced that Argentina will not be joining BRICS. He is very pro-US and pro-Israel and has taken a very anti-China position and is trying to dollarize his country when many countries are seeking the opposite, de-dollarization. We saw a clear example of this with the BRICS Bank, which is officially known as the New Development Bank. This was created as an alternative to the US-dominated World Bank. And in 2023, the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank, expanded and added new members, including Argentina, Saudi Arabia, and Zimbabwe, although it's likely that Argentina is going to leave this as well. And under the leadership of the new president of the New Development Bank, who is the former left-wing president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, she also announced that the BRICS Bank is de-dollarizing and is trying to give out more lending in local currencies of the members of the BRICS Bank. In a report that I did analyzing the expansion of the BRICS, I explained how the BRICS is encouraging local trade bilateral trade between members in local currencies. So China and Russia are trading in the Chinese yuan and Russian ruble. Russia and India are trading using the Russian ruble and the Indian rupee. China and Brazil have de-dollarized their trade and are trading in the Chinese yuan and the Brazilian real. And also at the same time, the BRICS increasingly represents a larger share of the world economy. Without Argentina, it's still going to represent about 37% of world GDP measured at purchasing power parity. And even more importantly, in some ways, the BRICS represents 40% of world global oil production now as it's expanding, and roughly 1/3 of world gas production. So these countries now in BRICS, especially now that it includes Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, they have the serious potential to challenge the hegemony of the US petrodollar system. Developments like these are why the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she acknowledged that the world is becoming more multipolar. She said the tectonic plates of geopolitics are shifting faster, and she acknowledged that the dominance of the US dollar is gradually declining.
This de-dollarization push got a boost from the West's financial sanctions on Russia, ironically, shutting out its banks from the SWIFT international payments network used for most financial transactions all over the world, plus the freezing of Russian assets held by foreign banks. That led to nations to join BRICS as a fallback in case of economic sanctions. So the sanctions of the United States on Russia are backfiring, also driving Russia to become, as we said earlier, overtaking Germany as the number 5 economy in the world. Huh? And the shift to non-dollar assets and transaction is the greenback's repeated volatility. Whenever the U.S. federal government debt nears its legally mandated borrowing limit fought over by rival Republicans and Democrats in Congress. And every time they hit that wall, all they do is just print money. And to recover, increase the interest rates. Recent years, central banks have therefore increased gold holdings and shipped bullions home instead of keeping them in Western banks. Before we go on, ladies and gentlemen, let us have this reminder of how you can get a copy of my book, my latest bestseller, which exposes the economic and political sabotage of the country's energy sector, and why we are paying one of the highest costs of electricity in the world, which is a manifestation that the hands of the United States is really backing up whoever controls Imperial Manila. Just text 0917-336-4366. Free delivery anywhere in the Philippines. We're extending this beyond Valentine's Day. 999 in National Capital Region, 1099 outside the National Capital Region. We're now going to read messages from our listeners. Here we go. Osman Mohammed Sin, good afternoon, Kaado. Good afternoon, everyone. Miss Anne Trope. Good afternoon, Maestro and viewers. Argules Joselito. Kaya hanggang ngayon, sa isip at sa salita, kolonyal pa rin ng kano ang Pilipinas, matitigil lang siguro kung tuloy ang paghihirap yung Amerika. Migration law na yan, pakonsuelo di bobo sa mga Pilipino, para kung magdala sila dito ng sundalo, maglagay ng bases, payag na payag ang Pangulo, walang tutol kahit bawal sa Article 18, Section 25. Luz E., good afternoon, Kaado. Kuya Pong, ang dating bayani, walang hiya talaga itong mga kano. Sa tingin pa rin nila, Pilipinas ay colony nila. Ang masakit para sa akin, itong mga pangulo na katulad ni Bongbong na pumapayag na ma-colonize pa rin tayo. Andres Teves, Philippine-American History. Paul Vincent Nayag Lopez, Marhay, na hapon po. Judith Biado, Four Waves, Cesar Soberano, there are no hiding now the truth of the U.S. world hegemony of traitors, lapdogs since 1898. The saboteurs of the revolution which we Filipinos have to lead to its logical conclusion. Elcas, Kaado, baka pwede po na pag-uwi ko na lang kuhain ang premyo ko sa GTNR. Hihiwatig po natin, i-relay po natin sa kanila. Paki-advise ako nito. Okay. Osman Mohammed Sin, may pahabol pa. It goes to show the U.S. is fully bought by Israel so much that they can't even say no to it, even for humanity. They're slave to Zionist Israel. The world now knows that the U.S. having its master too. Answer to. There you go. And our concern for now, basically, our concern for now, is we see the light at the end of the tunnel is definitely the BRICS, but the present administration has looked the other way. How long will it take our sitting president to come to that conclusion? A close confidant of the president and an appointed advisor came strongly against my often constructive criticism on how the president has become slow and incoherent in policy making. He even accused me of being an anti-Marcos. My goodness, I gave him pictures all the way in 1969 to show that I have nothing personal against the Marcoses. In fact, I was one of the early student leaders who stood by Marcos in his re-election campaign in 1969. And I have pictures to prove that. But one well-known turnaround was sacrificing 23 billion of development grants, assistance, and loans from Xi Jinping last January 2023 in exchange for a measly 82 million in U.S. pledges to support 4 additional EDCA bases. 82 million exchanged for 32 billion from China. What looked ridiculous to me was surprisingly not to this friend of mine. According to him, the U.S. caught the president in one of his moments of paranoia and threatened to replace him if he would not agree to fall under U.S. diktat. Just as they removed his father from power. On the other hand, if he played the American card, the U.S. would guarantee he stays in power as long as he wants. So he said, the president cannot do anything except to pivot to the United States and balance his relations with China. I find this surrealistic because what he seems to be saying is precisely what Rod Katipunan explained earlier. As an independent foreign policy would be to use the national interest as fulcrum in balancing relationships with China and the U.S., just as Duterte did. What President Marcos has been doing is to use the U.S. as fulcrum in regulating our relations with China to the sacrifice of our national interest on the other end of the proverbial seesaw. Our progress with China is way lower than that during the Benigno Aquino administration. Our most urgent national interest is suffering under high inflation due to the lack of new money. There is no money coming in to support the half of the populations who are, finding difficulty looking for wherewithal in this very hard time. The Americans continue to run our country through the ruling oligarchs, who is in bed with the president not just as cronies, but in unmitigated greed. And even if our numbers, macroeconomic numbers, are very high compared to other countries, and it is said that we are one of the fastest growing economies, first, our base is low. I told my friend from 0 to 300, from 0 to 3 rather, is 300% growth. But from 2 to 3 is only 33% growth. Saan ba tayo nanggagaling na napakataas ng ating statistics for growth? E di sa mababa. Impressed na kayo dyan? Ha? At ang problema dyan, yung pera na involved dito sa GDP, pag tinignan mo in terms of purchasing power parity, PPP, ay napakaliit per capita. Per Filipino that is now more than 110 million in population. Tapos may ayuda pa that would be equivalent now and to be distributed to 48% of our population. That is how we are deteriorating, because almost half ng ating population ay bibigyan na natin ng ayuda. Hello? There's got to be a better way. At kayong mga sumasakay sa likod ng tigre, kayong mga sumasakay sa likod ng natitira pang kapangyarihan ng Estados Unidos, tandaan ninyo ang sinabi ni John F. Kennedy. In the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. Uulitin ko, in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. Sa inyo mga hindi nakasunod, kung anong nangyari doon sa sumakay sa likod ng tigre para sila ay magkaroon ng masyadong malaking power poder, kapangyarihan, at maybe yaman. Saan napunta? Sa loob ng tigre. Kinain po sila ng tigre. Mga kabansa, huwag naman sanang ito ang mangyari sa mga nagpapanggap na ating mga lideres sa pangkasalukuyan, pero wala namang ibinibigay at inihahain sa taong bayan, lalo-lalo na yung mga dahop at nangangailangan, yung mga tinatawag natin na poorest of the poor. So, ito po yung lingkod, Ado Paglinawan, na sana na may masbasa na yung mga magnanakaw dyan sa Malacanang. May masbasa na yung mga wala namang kaalaman dyan sa gobyerno. At buksan na ang pintuan para tayo makinabang sa grasya na nanggagaling at hindi lamang pwedeng manggaling sa Estados Unidos because the US is a declining power. Let us open up our doors to any and all who would want to help the Philippines, especially the poor. Ito po yung lingkod, Ado Paglinawan ng Maestro. Nagpapaalam ng muli, magkita-kita tayo sa susunod na Sabado.
Don't blink, get ready. Get ready.